Well, everybody, welcome to Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, back after a week or so, and good to be here. Get that shadow out of my way. Hope everybody's doing well. Had a week of big relaxation, and it did me a world of good. And it's good to be back. So I hope everybody out there is doing well. It's the 5th of March, 2020. 2020. My goodness gracious. Anyway, it's great to be here. Good to see all of our friends in the chat room there. And let's see. Not really a whole lot to talk about that I'm aware of. So I guess we'll just call it a night. Thanks very much for joining us. Just see if I can do something about the color on these lights. It's just, they never really quite behave themselves, do they? Anyway, no, it's great to be here and looking at the political situation out there in the world. It's I don't know. I was up in Coeur d'Alene a couple of almost a month ago now, I guess, and I gave a couple speeches up there, basically saying that while the culture war is not over, it's won, and I do believe that. I see that every day. I see it more and more every day, and I think we're going to start seeing some pretty freaky stuff going on out there in the year to come. Since we spoke last, looked like Biden was done and looked like Bernie had the thing pretty much wrapped up. I'm amazed at the comeback, and it's just an indication of how weak Bernie Sanders' support really is. And furthermore, it just couldn't be better from a Republican point of view. I mean, the internet was down for 24 hours starting yesterday. We got it back a couple hours ago. The broadcast should be significantly better, by the way. We finally got off of the Wi-Fi and did a speed test, and it was 490 megabytes per second down and 517 up. And if that doesn't do it, then by golly, that won't do it. The comeback hoot, says Dave Big Booty. The comeback coot. Awesome. Love it. Anyway, the thing I was most, I wasn't really concerned. Let me just see if I can do something. I don't know why these lights are so dim. Hang on a sec. But they are. The network is talking to them, but they ain't a listening. No, it is what it is. Anyway, what it was looking like last time we talked, it was looking like Bernie was just, Joe Biden had just collapsed just before South Carolina. It was just Bernie all the way. That actually alarmed me a little bit. Not so much I was worried as in November, but still, for him to be the nominee of the Democratic Party of the United States is in itself a pretty scary kind of a proposition. But Stephen Scott and we did this almost hour-long show yesterday on post Super Tuesday events, and they're convinced, and they know more about it than I do, that really looks like Biden's going to go pretty much all the way to the nomination, which I find inconceivable. Nevertheless, there it is. So the question then becomes, now what? We were talking on the show a little bit about it. Scott's convinced, and he's probably right, that despite all of the loud talk and threats of violence from the Bernie bros, the fact is they're all kind of doped out losers. But from a from where we stand on the, that little tiny little hump of a hill outside of Mordor there, looking at the Black Tower, I don't see how things could look much better right now. I really don't. As I explained on that show, the beautiful thing from a Republican point of view is if Bernie had blown out Biden, that'd be one thing. If Biden had blown out Bernie, that'd be another thing. But when it's close, especially after what the DNC did to Bernie in 2016, if Biden gets the nomination, and it looks like he will, then I think there's going to be some serious civil unrest. I don't want to say I hope so, because I don't hope so. Because whenever that happens, people's property gets destroyed and people's lives are endangered and sometimes lost, and I certainly don't want to see that. But if they're stupid enough to do it, it will remind the American people, the way they were reminded in 1968 in Chicago, that the Democrats are essentially the party that riots when they don't get their way. And as I said, if Bernie had just been completely smoked and hadn't been in the running at all, they wouldn't have been able to get all lathered up. They were pretty sure they had it won, I think. And I don't think he's going to win it. So if it's Biden and not Bernie, then the convention becomes a giant case of end dairy lunatics running up on stage in the middle of speeches. That's also the Democratic Party brand now. And then if Biden completely collapses, and just putting up a show now that we shot a couple days ago, delayed because of the internet problems here. But if Biden's not going to get any better, folks. My mom had this condition, and he's not going to get any better, ever, and he's going to continue to get worse. And sometimes with this mental deterioration, you can get worse real fast, and sometimes you can get worse so badly that they can't even keep up the illusion anymore. I still have a funny feeling they're going to try and, well, without question, the whole Democratic convention is going to, the big announcement left for the Democrats is who the vice presidential nominee is going to be for Biden. And I think everybody, including the Democrats, including all the top-level leading Democrats, understand that what they're basically saying is whoever Biden's vice presidential nominee is going to be, that's the president. I think that's pretty much what people are looking at now, is they're looking at Biden as just kind of this, this shell of, I almost said respectability, at least familiarity, and they're going to try and whoever is going to be the VP for the Democratic Party is going to be recognized by the Democrats and the Republicans and the country as this is who they're actually running for president, because Biden's fallen apart fast, mentally fast. And this isn't just a gaffe, and we've watched Biden and his gaffes throughout all of the Obama presidency, and most of those were gaffes, but now it's like he's not coherent anymore. And that in itself says something about the Democrats in terms of their ethics. So it's just kind of fun to speculate on what's going to happen between now and the convention. The more delegates Bernie wins, the closer it's going to be. The closer it gets, the more likely the fight's going to get nasty. But Bernie gets to go to Milwaukee saying, I carried California, among other things, and I don't know. And we pointed out in that show we did the other day, the best news on the board, though, is actually from the other side. And to my astonishment, Donald Trump got more votes in California than Bernie Sanders did, and he got more votes than Joe Biden did. He didn't get more votes than Biden and Bernie combined, but I didn't go and vote in the Democratic primary. I didn't vote in the California primary, I should say, although it's essentially the same thing. There's no reason for me to go vote in the primary in California. I'll vote in the general election, that's for sure. But in an election where, in California, where essentially, Trump's not even on the ballot. For all intents and purposes, he's not. He's not contested, and there's no reason to go and vote for Donald Trump when he's already the Republican nominee. And so I didn't. And yet enough Republicans came out and voted for the guy who's unopposed. Enough Republicans in California came out to vote in an election that has no effect on the national election in November whatsoever. And Donald Trump pulled more votes with essentially, I'm speaking metaphorically, without being on the ballot than either Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden in California. AOC says he beat all three combined in Texas. Now, Trump winning in Texas is Trump winning all three Democrats combined in Texas is an indication he's got this November election largely pretty much won. But for Trump to carry more votes, bring more people out to vote for him in an election that doesn't matter at all for him, and have them beat Bernie Sanders versus Joe Biden in the biggest electoral prize in the country. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to offend anyone. Is unbelievable. I really think, even if I thought that if Bernie's the nominee, that Trump would win 50 states. I think if Biden's the nominee, Trump's going to win 48, 49, or 50 states. And there's only one thing now, I think, that can stop Donald Trump from winning in November, and that's having Republicans assume that there's no way that Donald Trump can lose in November. I think the only way for Trump to lose now is for people to think that he can't lose. And I'm relieved to know from the people I know personally, and also from the experience from a few people I know who went to CPAC, said that everybody there's confident but not overconfident. You're doing compelling content, ladies and gentlemen, when the comment section has nothing to do with what you're talking about. So maybe I should just go ahead and move on and take some questions. So I guess what we'll do is we'll go back to the Facebook situation and see what we can find there. Because I really took a week off. I was just really exhausted. You could have told from the week before that, which was just mind-boggling, and I'm still feeling a little less than running at full power anyway. So let's have a look at some of the questions here on the comments in Facebook, and we'll see what we can make out of this thing here. We can make a nice hat. Dave Olson is back. I should say top fan, Dave Olson. Hi, Bill. Would you please answer Eric Blake's question about Vice? He's been asking the same question for 2 years now, and a sharp lad like him ought to come up with some new material. All right, then. I'm scrolling down trying to find the question about Vice. When somebody else asks you to answer somebody else's question, then you got an issue here. It'll appear in the comments section since I think he's watching live. Let me have a look here. I'm looking for what that actual question is. So give me a moment here. And let's see. There's a bunch of them here. I'm just trying to find which one has anything to do with Vice. I can't really go back and look at previous ones. If somebody wants to tell me what this Vice question is, I'm happy to answer it. But I don't see a question on Vice, so I think we'll just go on to the next one until that sort of resolves itself. Let's see what we get. Dave Olson again in number 2 slot. Now hang on. There's 4 replies to that. Let's see what it is. I just posted a new one. It's a Vice question. Maybe I just need to refresh this puppy. Let's try that. Sorry, takes a moment. All right, let's see what we got. I still only have 4 questions there. I don't see it. So hold on. Here it is. All right. So, greetings, Bill. Watching 2018's Dick Cheney film Vice, I found it of two minds. For all the brain-dead, uber-lefty rambling of the film's narrator, that is, Christian Bale and Amy Adams play Dick and Lynn, is highly sympathetic and loving towards each other and their children. Frankly, sans narration, the film almost comes off as pro-Cheney. Amy says she's now a big Lynn Cheney fan, and even argued with the director Adam McKay over politics to stay in character. Wink, wink. Meanwhile, Bale said that he had to provide a balance against McKay's left-wing sensibilities. His words. So, Bill, in making the film half contradict McKay's intent, Archie Bunker style, have Christian and Amy given us a teachable moment? Can conservative-friendly players in Hollywood successfully sabotage the agenda of the Hollywood left? Okay, got it, finally. Well, first of all, I don't think that Christian Bale or Amy Adams would exactly be called conservatives. But it is certainly possible that the original version of the script was so you can become so biased that it's simply just not even worth doing. It becomes embarrassing, and that seems to be possibly the case. I didn't see the movie. I didn't have any particular desire to see the movie, but to the bigger issue, something's going on out there, something wonderful. Things are really changing out there fast, in terms of the speed of politics, changing fast, and fast in our favor, and it's accelerating, it's snowballing. It's kind of, something feels like it's reaching a tipping point. I've been talking about us being past peak progressivism for 2 years now, and I've been talking about people not wanting to buy progressive values, even if you wrap them in Star Wars, for a year and a half, and the anger out there at the left and so on for having ruined all these franchises, which has turned from anger to sheer, almost like a nihilistic abandonment of everything. It's just the attitude now is fine. You managed to kill them all. Good for you. Hope you're proud of yourself. Doctor Who, all this other stuff. And then Bernie starts with the surge, but the surge is only because of how weak Biden is. Biden numbers were so poor because of the way the first three, the caucuses and all that were set up in New Hampshire. And then Biden comes roaring back. People say the stock market drop was about COVID-19, but much better evidence, especially considering the rebound, to say that the reason the stock market had the biggest drop in history last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was because Bernie Sanders looked like he was going to be the president of the United States nominee for the Democratic Party. Once Biden came roaring back after South Carolina, that spike, the drop disappeared, and after Super Tuesday, it got the biggest one-day gain in history. So the market is saying they don't want socialism. The people are saying they don't want socialism. If you're going to rally to Joe Biden, I mean, Biden, in his current state, Biden, you got nothing. I saw a Roger Simon article, and there wasn't anything in there that was so much like really, surprising or new. But the title of it actually did kind of focus things. And he said, is Milwaukee, the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee, going to be the end of the Democratic Party? Because I've been saying that it is that before the primaries even started, before the candidates even got on stage, right after 2018 election, with AOC going out and marking out this far left territory, it's been clear to me that the Democratic Party has a fundamental divide in it between the social justice crowd and the former blue collar crowd, and they can't have both. They're very, very, very different. The closest thing I could think of to an analogy on the Republican side would be if the Republican Party were to basically go down the road that was threatened by Pat Buchanan. And a lot of this was made up too. I'm not accusing Buchanan of anything. I'm just telling you this is the vibe. If the Republican Party were to basically say that the Republican Party is a Christian party, and that the goal of the Republican Party is to create a much stronger Christianity in America, to bring that the entire political purpose of not the moral underpinning, the political purpose of the Republican Party was to make America a Christian nation. If you'd had that situation in on the right in America, you'd have the same kind of situation that the Democrats have now. If the Republican Party were to say, well, let me rephrase that. If there were two candidates for the Republican Party, and one of them was saying that we have to make America a Christian nation, then those people would have enthusiastic support, and then other Republicans would say, well, I certainly don't agree with that. But does that mean I vote for Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or Barack Obama? It locks you out of your own party. And socialism has always been kind of the religion of the left-wing policies, with a more socialistic view of America than right-wing policies, have always been kind of the religious guiding line of the left, and the way that Christianity is kind of the moral underpinning of most people on the right. But no one is on the right is saying is this needs to be official policy, that we're going to make America a Christian nation. But Bernie Sanders is saying to the Democrats, the goal of the Democratic Party will be to make America into a socialist nation. And that leaves a lot of Democrats in the weeds. And look, elections are almost exclusively powered, given the state of politics in this country, and it's been, I mean, I voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I'm going to vote for him in 2020 with a much higher level of enthusiasm and confidence, only because I didn't know what I was getting in 2016, but I knew what the alternative was. There are many people out there who believe Donald Trump was the guy from the beginning, and to those people have my high respect. But most of the time, people are more motivated by voting against somebody than voting for somebody. And this is why the California results are so phenomenal. If it turns out, well, here's some things we can just state with certainty. Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. We can also say with certainty that the entire policy of the Democratic Party since 2016 election is that Donald Trump has to go. And so that's their entire battle plan, is Donald Trump has to go. And they're going to nominate whoever they think has the best chance of defeating Donald Trump. And everything we've seen so far says that, from all the mouths of all the candidates, is that we really don't have anything to sell you other than we know you must hate Trump as much as we do, so therefore, who's most likely to beat him? But if Donald Trump can turn out more votes in California than the people whose entire policy to defeat Donald Trump can turn out, and he's not even on the ballot for any practical reason, then I think they're just absolutely, completely, and totally boned, and I don't see any way out of it for him. And not only that, I don't see any way out of it after the convention. I don't see any way for him out of it after the general election. If things go the way they look like they're going to go, and I know this is in response to Eric's question about, is Hollywood learning a lesson? No, Hollywood will be the last place to learn a lesson. But it is interesting that both Amy Adams and Christian Bale felt that they were being too left-wing about it. And so now this is what the point I'm trying to make is, right, this whole left-wing socialism thing of the Democrats as an alternative, one of two alternatives in American politics. Here's what I'm trying to say. Democrats love socialism as long as they're not in any danger of actually getting any. That's what it really comes down to. They love the idea of socialism because it's a fig leaf for their own wealth and power grabs. So they can talk about socialism, and they use socialism to disguise the fact that they're all billionaires and control freaks. But once it became apparent that they might actually get their socialism, now all of a sudden they're really on the spot. Now they're all retreating. It's kind of like these Republican rhinos who were like saying, "Oh, the second, boy, if Obama's elected in 2008, we give the Republicans the House in 2010. House Republicans say, boy, if we only had the Senate and the presidency, we'd repeal Obamacare right now. That's why we're here. It's what the Tea Party movement's all about." Okay, so a couple election cycles go by. In 2016, we give them the Senate. Then Republican senators and representatives say, wow, if we only had the presidency, 2014 rather, if we only had the presidency, we'd have Obamacare repealed first thing. And they're saying this because they know that it's not going to happen. And then you get Trump in 2016. Finally, you get the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And now's a chance to do the thing they've been talking about doing the whole time, and they won't do it. They don't have the votes for it. And that's because they talked about repealing Obamacare because they knew there was no chance of it. And this is exactly the same thing with them and with the left and socialism. So what happens to this party if they lose? If it's, look, it's either going to be Bernie, Biden, or the person who replaces Biden when Biden can't remember his name. So what happens? If Bernie gets the nomination, which seems exceedingly unlikely, they're going to lose 50 states, and they know it. And if Biden gets the nomination, Bernie supporters are not going to jump on board the Biden bandwagon. Bernie Sanders could give a 3-hour speech talking about how every single Bernie supporter he has needs to go out there and vote for Biden, but they won't do it because Bernie supporters are not angry at Trump. They're angry at the establishment. Bernie supporters are powered by a desire to burn down the establishment. And if Bernie's not on the ticket, then Joe Biden is the establishment. They're not going to come out for Biden. So the party's going to lose half of their vote either way, and the Republicans are on fire after the impeachment thing. It's going to be a landslide. So what happens, though? This goes to the cultural thing. I know, Eric, I know I'm dancing around it. I don't really much care about the movie Vice, but what you're talking about is a shift, and that's where I'm trying to go with this. So let's just say that all this stuff happens, and Biden's the nominee, and he creaks his way through the convention. And if he does, I personally think, I genuinely do, Donald Trump has a killer instinct. And I think Donald Trump's killer instinct, if Biden deteriorates the way I think he's going to deteriorate, will be for Trump to visibly back away from sticking the knife in Biden, like as if it's like this isn't even a debate. This is I'm not going to twist a knife in a guy who's on the ground dying here. So what happens if Trump wins like big 50 state big, 48 state big, which I think is likely? What happens then? And the House comes back to us and all of this stuff, which I think all of this is likely. What happens? What do the Democrats do? It's hard to see how it survives as a party. It just doesn't. Merlin, another Merlin variation, says like a big win like Reagan. I'm not talking about a big win like Reagan. I'm talking about something much, much more important than that. Reagan whipped Mondale in 84, Reagan carried 49 out of 50 states, and Mondale won his own state by 5,000 votes. Otherwise, Reagan would have swept the entire table. Then you hear me out. Nixon did the same thing with McGovern in 72. Enormous wins for conservatives, right? But after those wins were over, the Democratic Party was still intact. After Nixon beat McGovern, the Democrats came back with Carter, who was not as far left, at least in appearance. And after Reagan whipped Mondale, they decided to try it again with kind of Mondale Light, which was Dukakis, and they lost again. So after that, they came back with Bill Clinton, who was much more of a centrist. But how does this Democratic Party recover from 2020 if they lose? And I think they're going to lose. What do they build on? What's left? Their candidates are all in their 70s. Socialism will have been, if Biden is, see, this is the part that's so interesting to me. If Biden is the nominee, and it looks like he's going to be, then socialism has been defeated in America. It's been defeated before Donald Trump even has a chance to take apart what's left of it. As a matter of fact, it's already over. Socialism as a threat to America is over now. It's over because even this early on, even the Democrats have done everything they can to run away from Bernie Sanders. They're so desperate to get away from Bernie Sanders and socialism, Democrats now. They're so desperate that they're going to Joe frickin' Biden, who never had any charisma. I don't know if many of you knew this, but prior to South Carolina 2 weeks ago, Joe Biden, who's been in politics, run for president 3 times, has never won a single primary ever. Ever. So the Democrats themselves, and I'm talking about the voters now, are so disgusted with the idea of Bernie Sanders and socialism that socialism is a threat to this country is already over, because it doesn't look like Bernie could possibly be the nominee. And if he is the nominee, he's going to lose badly. So where do they go? What do they have after that? All of the people who are the socialists in the Democratic Party, virtually all of them except for the leader, are young. So let's look at it and let's just play this game out just for the sake of it. What happens on the first Wednesday in November if Donald Trump wins 50 states, and we'll just say 50 states for the sake of it, for the sake of it, for a blowout? What happens then? Well, I think we can all be pretty well assured that Bernie Sanders is not likely to be much of a threat in 2024. And so you've got a Democratic Party in ruins where the adults are saying the reason we got shellacked was we moved too far to the left, but all the young people coming up who are going to vote either Republican or Democrat are looking at this and saying, well, the Democratic Party is just another version of the establishment, so why even vote for them? I don't see, we're not talking about 10% of the party or 20% of the party. We're talking about 50% of the party. Where do they go? If the young people, this is why it's so freaking beautiful. What happens if Trump wipes them out in November, right? Then what? Okay, the party's going to say we lost twice because we were too far to the left. And other people in the party are going to say, no, we're not far enough to the left, but there's the scoreboard, right? Socialism couldn't even win their own party. So where are all of these young socialists going? The young people are the socialists. They're getting older. Where do they go? If Bernie's not the nominee and Trump wipes out Biden, they're going to say it's just because Biden's just the establishment. So where do they go? I don't see any way for that party to survive. It's different than it was in 72 and 84. In 72 and 84, the Democratic Party had a deep bench of upcoming politicians who were centrists, who were available, and they had some charisma, at least Clinton did. And so where do they go? Where does the party go? Not about what candidate. Where does the party go? They've already said they don't want Kamala Harris. They've already said they don't want Buttigieg. They've already said all these things. Where do they go? I think it's the Whigs. I think the Democrats are heading towards the same fate that the Whig Party met. For those of you not familiar, the Democratic Party's been here for quite a long time. The Whigs were a coalition group that basically opposed the Democrats on a number of issues, but once slavery became an issue and the Republican Party was born, virtually all of the people who were Whigs went to the Republican Party, and those who were so pro-slavery that they couldn't stand joining the Republican Party, which was an anti-slavery party, then those Whigs went over to the Democrats. But the Whigs simply, they just gone. They're gone. So, if I had to guess, I would say that after November, if things go the way they look like they're going to go, then the Democratic Party is essentially going to vanish, that the future of the Democratic Party as it exists today is in the radical socialist left wing, which is young and getting bigger, versus the remnants of the blue-collar workers who would have gone for Biden, who just lost. Trump is making them lots of money. So the Democratic Party, the Biden wing of it, is kind of this withered rump, and that's not enough to win, as they're going to find out. So I suspect what will probably happen, if I had to guess, is that there would be a third party formed by the socialists, by the far left, and the far left is going to start a party after 2020 catastrophe, and then the people who currently make up the Democratic Party are going to realize that, okay, if the socialists pull 50% of the Democratic Party away from us, and the other 50% is the party of Biden that just got shellacked, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen, I think, is that they will form the Democratic Party will split in two, and it won't be, I don't think it'll be the Republicans, the socialists, and the Democrats. I think it'll be the Republicans and the socialists. And I think that the Democrats, old school Democrats, sane Democrats, will come to the Republican Party, and if we're smart, that's what we'll do. But I don't see the Democratic Party becoming more socialist after 2020. The reason they're going to get shellacked is because they've gone so far to the left already, but you can't convince the left-wingers about this, so they're going to go off and start their own party. If the situation were reversed, as we said earlier, if the Republican Party had decided that 50% of its population, of the Republican Party, and the young population, the passionate part of the population, the vocal part of the population, and the growing part of the population, was saying we need to have the Republican Party mission be to make America a fully Christian country and everyone in America will be Christian. If that happened and that party lost, what do you suppose we would do? The people who passionately believed in this would not suddenly disappear. That's where the passion is, and they're younger and their demographic is growing. They'd start the American Christian Party. And then that would leave the Republicans, assuming that the Democrats were united behind somebody like centrist like Bill Clinton or something like that, then Republicans would have a choice of saying, well, do I join the party of that's determined to make America fully Christian? I'm opposed to that on all kinds of different philosophical basis, even though I'm a Christian myself, let's say. So what do? Do I join them? No. Do I stay in this party that's half a party that can't win anymore? And we don't have a parliamentary system, so it's not like they can form a coalition with us. No. I guess the only chance left then is to go to the Democrats and try to make them more conservative. I just don't know what else to say. Talek says Republicans need to focus on liberty and individualism. That's exactly correct. And it's not just vague things like liberty and freedom, and I know they're the most precious things there are, but they're vague concepts, and more than anything, they've been tossed around so many times that they've basically lost their meaning. Well, we represent freedom and liberty, and no, the Republican Party should be doing now, going forward, if Trump wins the way he looks like he's going to win, is they need to say, we are the party of leaving you alone to get on with your life. We're the party that says there should be less politics. The reason the country's so divided, country's always been politically divided. But as I've said a few times before, if you're a difference between a Republican and a Democrat in 1963, you're talking about how much the difference in your life is how much aid do we send to Kenya, And do we want a 22% tax rate or a 19% tax rate? Those are the difference. It's when the progressives decided to push politics into everything. Sports. Your daughter who's in high school, who's on the high school track team, is now going to win or lose that election based on politics. National, federal level politics. Her ability to spend her Saturday afternoon in peace is now going to be determined by the politicians in Washington. That intrusion of politics into every aspect of human life, what size soda you can order, thank you, Mayor Bloomberg, you Republican, you, all of it. All of it. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you can't do. Everything that is not mandatory is forbidden. The Republican Party needs to say, listen, we believe that government should be as small as possible because we think everybody should be left alone. Here are the things that we think government should do: defend the country, and 3 or 4 other things, and then that's it. And then that way, you're not providing the ideology. And I know this is kind of going a little out on a limb here, but I'm kind of thinking this through as I go along. The ideology of the Republican Party should be of conservatism. Really, the ideology of the Republican Party should be: we don't have an ideology. We don't. We don't have a political. We don't have an agenda to force on you. We think you should live your life the way you want to. And we think that the smaller the government is, the less other people are telling you what to do. And then we can all agree to disagree, because if you think one thing about politics and I think something about politics, that's all fine, but it doesn't matter, because it's not going to affect whether or not your daughter has a chance to win her track meet. And it doesn't matter because it doesn't affect whether or not somebody's going to tell you what kind of a size of a Coke you can have. Just get it out of our lives. And then disagreeing with each other, we won't have to fight to the death over political issues, because it's not going to matter in our lives. People are fighting to death over political issues because they're fighting to death over whether or not their 4-year-old kid is required to take a course on transgenderism in kindergarten by law. That's what this whole thing's about, is about the politicization of all of our lives. And so, yeah, let the socialists and the progressives. Progressivism is the philosophy of control. It's the philosophy of controlling large groups of people who live in cities. It was basically invented in the late 1800s, had most of its power in the early 1900s, and was a product of a second wave industrial era concentrated central manufacturing top-down structure, and this appealed to them. So that's what progressivism is all about. Progressivism cannot survive in an agricultural society, and it can't survive in an information age society. It can only exist in between those two. That's second age, and that's what progressivism was. And clinging to it is not possible. They can't do it. This is why I'm feeling better every day. We did a show, again, delayed a little bit because of the time we lost, but Steve Green's topic on Right Angle this week is a California Bill AB 5. It's the bill that requires that if you, for example, if you write 35 articles, if you write 34 articles and you submit them to any publication, newspaper, online magazine, you get paid for them. You submit them to Instapundit and get paid for them. You do 35, you can be an independent contractor. You do 34, you can be an independent contractor. You do 35, and now Instapundit has to make you a full-time employee, and they have to pay your health benefits and all the rest of it. And they're essentially eliminating the gig economy. So what they're saying is, if you're a drummer for a band and you play, let's say every Thursday or every other Thursday or once a month at Hard Rock Cafe or Joe's Tavern, better example, if you're a drummer in a band and Joe's Tavern pays you to come and be a drummer 2 times a month, under this law, AB 5, you'd have to be an employee of Joe's Tavern. Joe's Tavern would have to pay you and your health and retirement benefits, and you'd have to do withholding and all the rest of it, all of it. And the reason they want this is they want to maintain that kind of control. They also want the money. And as I pointed out, what they really want, the reason they hate the gig economy is because if you're a 1099 employee, you have to write a check to the government for your taxes. It's not withheld. Government withholding your money is the reason that we're in this trouble. Of all the things I could change, even more than the 17th Amendment, I would eliminate payroll withholding, because the, these criminals have figured it out now, and they figured out the psychology of it to the point. How many of you know? How many of you people not only know, how many of you feel this way yourselves? Don't blame yourself for this, not your fault. But how many of you are like looking forward to April 15th because you get your tax refund? Or how many people do you know that are looking forward to April 15th because you get your tax refund? Hey, I just did my taxes. Looks like I'm getting $1,500 back. I'm going to get a check for $1,500 come April. I can't wait to spend it. This you hear every single day. Every single day. I can't wait to get my tax refund. What does that mean? What that means is that because you're an employee, not an independent contractor, because you're an employee, you're looking forward to getting $1,500, which you perceive to be tax-free, because it is. Here's a check for $1,500. But what you don't see is that if you thought you were hired at $600 a week, you're paid, you think that was the deal. Okay, $600 a week, that's what you get paid. That's great. And every week you get your paycheck, and your paycheck is $437. And you understand this going into it. You're getting paid $600 a week, but the government is taking taxes out before you get your check. And so you get a paycheck of $437. And you plan your life around $437 a week, knowing that your taxes are paid for and taken care of. Okay, so far so good. But since you never touch the money, you don't realize it's missing. And what happens is, if you're looking forward to your refund on April 15th, you're a person celebrating the fact that the government has taken $15,000 of yours, and they're going to give you $1,000 of it back, and you're going to feel like they're doing you a favor. And you're looking forward to it. But if you're on a gig-based economy and a 1099 employee, April 15th is the day, not where you get $1,500 or $1,000 back from your $15,000 in taxes. April 15th is the day. I know you're supposed to do this quarterly. Put that aside for a second. April 15th is the day when you suddenly get to look at your bank account and say, oh, I've got to write a check to the government for $15,000 tomorrow. And now you know why they want to eliminate the gig economy. It's because 1099 employees don't have their taxes withheld. It's harder to collect that money, number one, but much worse than that, it makes people realize how much money the government is, all various governments, not just one, state, local, all of it, finally makes people realize how much money they're not getting of their own work because it's withheld in advance. And this is the genius of payroll withholding. This is why the government takes in $3,000 billion every year. $3,000 billion every year, and they tell you it's not enough. We can't run the government on this measly $3.5 billion. I don't know what the actual number is now, but for the last 10 years, the federal government spends more money than China's economy. And as Jeremy Boring points out, kind of interesting, isn't it, that the government of the freest people in the world supposedly requires more money than the total output of the largest communist country in the world. So, my point is, all of this is changing, and none of it is changing for the worse. For the first time in my adult life, not only are things getting better, but they look to be in a position of becoming spectacularly better, like fall of Bar-Dor better. The speech I gave up in Coeur d'Alene basically said, can we agree on some things that seem obvious to me? Number one, Would you say the news media is more effective today in terms of influencing people's thought, or do you think it was more effective in terms of influencing thought 50 years ago? I don't think there's any question about that. 50 years ago, Walter Cronkite said that's the way it is, and people believe that's the way it is. There was no other news source. The bias that was built into the news 50 years ago was invisible. And so clearly the ability of the news media to influence Americans' thinking by determining what they get to see and don't see in terms of information is clearly much, much, much diminished today, because now people are aware of it, and now there's the internet and there's alternate means of finding out what's going on. Nobody would have known about Hillary Clinton's emails if it hadn't been for the internet. So certainly news media is not as effective as it was 50 years ago. Hollywood used to be beloved by everybody. Everybody loved Hollywood because you didn't know what an actor's political position was. Johnny Carson hosted The Tonight Show for, 27 years? Nobody really knew if he was a Republican or a Democrat. He didn't talk about it. He certainly didn't sell it. And all of these movie stars like Jimmy Stewart and all these people were revered. And even later, as he got into people like Clint Eastwood and so on, they're revered because nobody knew what their politics were. They appealed to everybody. 50 years later, no one's watching the Oscars, and nobody cares. And Ricky Gervais is getting up in front of these people and openly mocking them to their face and telling them nobody gives a damn about what you say about politics. No one cares anymore. And on top of all of this, no one's watching Hollywood movies anymore. No one's watching TV anymore. You can certainly say that Netflix and streaming services have got a couple of series that people are watching, but generally speaking, movies are far less lucrative than video games are. Broadcast TV is dead in the water and is not going to undead itself. Almost everything I watch is user-generated content. I watch almost nothing but YouTube videos from other people who are just like me. So clearly, in terms of the left's ability to control the pop culture and influence how we think and vote that way, Hollywood and pop culture is far less influential than it was 50 years ago. Education. 50 years ago, a college degree from Harvard meant that you had to be the best in the country, and took an enormous amount of work just to get into Harvard, and getting out of Harvard with the degree was even bigger. A Harvard degree meant something. A college degree meant something. Now a college degree just means that you sat in a room rocking yourselves back and forth, stroking your puppy and playing with your crayons because somebody came on campus and said something that you didn't like, and so you're triggered and you're emotionally destroyed by it. Colleges used to have the ability to mold people into left-wing thought because they were respected institutions. It's not the case anymore. And finally, the politics. Democratic politics had some resemblance to sanity. Now it's all about how can we top each other? Who can make the most outrageous statement? When 11 Democratic nominees running for president all raise their hands, when the question is, who's in favor of having regular paying Americans provide free health care, not for themselves, but for illegal aliens? And all 11 of them put their hands up. Then their politics are absurd. AK-47 for now says YouTube's doing its best to deplatform conservatives. I don't mean to be facetious towards you, AK, but really? No kidding. Everything I never put out a firewall that did less than 400,000 views, and now they do 20,000. I'm well aware of this. That's not the point I'm making here. The point I'm making is this. 50 years ago, the left had in its hands 4 invisible, brand new razor-sharp weapons made of highly polished and highly forged Spanish steel with a great big edge on it. They controlled information. They controlled the pop culture. They controlled education, information through news, pop culture, education, and their politics were reasonable. 50 years ago, when they started this assault on freedom, they had these weapons. The weapons were invisible, they were new, and they were very, very sharp. And if socialism and leftism loses the way it looks like it's already lost. It lost after Super Tuesday. My point is, if with brand new weapons that were invisible and 50 years of effort, they could not sell socialism to the American people, then they gave it their best shot. And they lost. And I don't see that there's any way to argue with that. What are they going to do? They're going to try again? With what? With their news media telling us what to think? Nobody trusts the news anymore. They used to sell credibility. They gave that up. They sell indoctrination. Now everybody knows about it. with entertainment. They're going to use movie stars and pop singers to influence us every single day. More and more people start listening to guys like Critical Drinker and Nerdotic and all of these YouTube people. Nobody gives a damn about what Meryl Streep thinks anymore because nobody watches Meryl Streep movies anymore. Education used to be the ability where you'd go to college and somebody would tell you that this is true, and now we go to education and people in colleges are being told by mathematics teachers that Stalin was a great man. Nobody believes this anymore. Homeschooling has taken care of this. The internet has taken care of it. It's over. It's done. And their politics become untenable even for the most left-wing people. They gave it their best shot and they lost. They lost. They just didn't win. It's over. It's not over, but we win. And now in November, we're going to see the result of this. And if you remember how bad it was when Barack Obama was elected, you certainly remember how bad it was when he was reelected. And if you think that they've lost their mind when Trump was elected, you wait till you see what happened when Trump gets reelected in a landslide. And all of it is going to get real ugly. The point I made in that speech up there was that the Pacific War was not over after Midway, but after Midway it was won. The Japanese had Kito Butai. I did finally manage to read Shattered Sword. The Japanese had, as a fleet, this is important, when the Japanese put all 6 of their aircraft carrier decks together in Kito Butai, the Mobile Strike Force, that force of 6 aircraft carriers was unbeatable. But by the time you get to so they attack Pearl Harbor and they smash it. They attack the Indian Ocean campaign, smash it. They decide to peel 2 of those 4 carriers off for the Coral Sea. One of them is badly damaged. The other one doesn't have enough air crew, so they go to Midway with 4 out of 6 carriers. Well, their 4 carriers run up against 3 American carriers. And because of it was not exactly a well-coordinated attack, but because of this Japanese overconfidence and many other factors, now all of a sudden, Kito Butai, which is 6 fleet carriers, operating in action, unbeatable. They go into Midway, not with Kito Butai. They go into Midway with 2/3 of it, 4 of the decks instead of 6. And when the Americans run 3 decks against their 4 decks, they lose all 4 of their decks. Once Midway was done, the battle for the Pacific was won. They had no chance ever again to win in the Pacific after Midway. And Midway happened 6 months into the war, happened in mid-42. So you had the rest of 42, you had all of 43, you had all of 44, and you had half of 45. And that's when the real dying occurred. The real dying occurred long after they had lost the war. So the left has lost this war, but the war is not over. And the real dying is going to come. When I say dying, I don't mean so much physical violence, because thank God, for some reason in history, we did manage to learn enough from our forefathers and our founders to realize that this time, the people who want to murder everybody when they lose aren't the ones that have the guns. And that's something. This time, it's the victims, the potential victims, the intended victims are the ones with the guns. So they're not going to have their bloodbath. So if you want to know what the future looks like for the country for the next several years until the Democratic Party disappears and we get another 20 years of socialists going back into their holes, because that idea will never die. As long as humans biologically produce people who are lazy and who are determined to tell other people what to do and envious, then we'll have socialist type people. They're never going to go away. But you can mow the yard. After that's over, I think what you can expect to see is big amplification of 2 things that we already see. On the political end, Nancy Pelosi tearing up Donald Trump's State of the Union speech is how the future is going to look when the Democratic Party elitists and the Hollywood elitists realize that it's over. We're going to see a lot more of that. We're going to see a lot more of the kind of, what's her name? I can't even remember her name. Hang on. Kathy Griffin. We're going to see more of the Kathy Griffin kind of thing. We're going to see more left-wing actors and more left-wing comedians and so on doing more and more violent stuff, more and more graphic stuff. We're going to see more things like movies about hunting and killing Republicans because this is going to be their death rattle. So the Japanese knew by let me rephrase that. By the morning of June 7th or 8th, 1942, the Japanese no longer had a chance to win that war or really even tie. And it took a long time for them to emotionally accept that fact. Let's say that happened by 1944, by the Marianas, by the Battle of the Marianas. The Japanese had intellectually accepted the fact that they'd lost the war. There's still another year of even more killing, which was what was required for them to get out of a psychological mode, which goes like this. Okay, we've lost the war, and since we've lost the war, we're going to let it all burn. Since the only thing we care about is over, then what we care about is over. So we're going to take as much of the world with us since we lost. That's what the last year in the Pacific looked like. It's what the last year and a half, 2 years of Hitler's Germany looked like. It's what the last year of the Confederacy looked like. You have a cause you believe in. You're defeated on the battlefield. The war is won or lost, depending on your viewpoint. It takes a year for you to realize this intellectually, and then it takes another year after you've already understood that you've lost the war for the pride of being defeated to be beaten out of you, and most of that means the hardcore fire breathers have to basically be killed in combat. They're just going to... After Gettysburg, the war was... The South could not win the war after Gettysburg. Gettysburg was the last chance the South had to win the war. If the South had won at Gettysburg and taken Harrisburg, and a northern capital had fallen, there's a reasonably good chance that England would have come in, Great Britain would have come in on the side of the Confederacy, possibly, and then they would have had a chance to have their war aims met, which was a separate country. But once Lincoln made the Emancipation Proclamation and made it about slavery, that was it. England was never going to come in on the side of the war of slaves. So after Gettysburg, the South had no chance to win the war. And it took them a year to figure that out, and then it took them another year of saying, well, we're going to go down fighting. So that's what we're going to see in the culture war. I had a couple people make nice comments about the Cold War documentary, which I think we release part 6 tomorrow. 6 to go. Tomorrow will be halfway. And when I wrote that series, up until about a month ago, I thought I was writing about the longest war in America's history. The Cold War, 42 years, depending on how you mark it. That's a long conflict. It wasn't until a good deal later than that I realized, no, that's not the longest war in America's history, not even close. The Culture War is the longest war in America's history. You could pick a start date on it, any number of start dates if I had to pick one for the Culture War. I would probably go with the end of World War I, when the Frankfurt School decided that they would make the socialist revolution not about the economy and the workers, but about the culture and the dispossessed. The whole Frankfurt School. That would have been, let's just say 1920. That works out pretty well, doesn't it? We've been in a 100-year war now. The culture war is 100 years old. And we won it. I was about to smile or say something, crow loud about it, but that's kind of suddenly struck me as just too big for that. It's too big for that. It took them 100 years. The first 25, 30 of these years from 1920, it already weakened the government and the progressive amendments and prohibition and the income tax and all this stuff. I was just laying the groundwork. But it's over. And I'm, a lot of it has got to do with the fact that the information age economy is not centralized. If there'd been no information age, we wouldn't be having this conversation. They would have won, but they didn't. So, um, yeah, in the comment section, they say now they're going to have to either die fighting or accept the fact that they got their asses handed to them, and they won't. Some people will realize this is not what the American people want, and they'll move on. But most of them won't. Most of the Bernie Bros are going to look at this and say, "All right, well, we tried democracy, and we lost. So now we're going to have to try something else." And when they realize that the people that they're going to try and go to war with are the ones with the guns, then they're going to say, well, if we can't have socialism in America, then there won't be any America. We'll destroy everything. We'll take it all down with us. That's the actual phrase that really should stick in our minds. That's really it. I don't know if Hitler said it verbatim. He certainly said things that were very close to it. But basically, that's what's coming to us now in the culture war. Now that the culture war is won but not over, their attitude, once it sinks into them, and it will sink into them after November, then their attitude is going to be, well, if we can't have our communist America, then we're going to take it all down with us. And okay. Okay, after Midway, the war was won, and all the real killing was yet to come. But it's that or lose, and it's just so sad that this is the way human beings are constructed. After Stalingrad, the war was lost for Hitler. That's when he accelerated the death camps. After Gettysburg, the war was lost for the Confederacy, and that's when the bloodbath that started with the Wilderness and Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, almost a year around Petersburg, all of it, all of the real bloodbath, Chickamauga, all of this after the war was lost. So anyway, I'm going to do one or two more, and one of the questions is about the cruise. I have not heard anything from the cruise agency yet. We're certainly intending to go on this cruise. COVID-19, and I'm not going to use the word coronavirus anymore. Coronavirus is a type of virus of which COVID-19 is one, and it's pointless to muddy the waters by increasingly using terms that don't make any sense. So COVID-19 is the name of this particular coronavirus. Yes, Talix, I'm very interested in the Virpal stuff. Had nothing to do with anything. COVID-19 is something I mean to do a little writing about. You know what? I'll end with this and just get this, because the more I talk about this, the clearer it gets for me. So that in many ways, Stratosphere Lounge is a great place to rehearse these ideas and get feedback and learn things I didn't know and so on. But yeah, well, we'll talk about the virus for a bit, and then I think we'll call it a night. So here's what I see is going on culturally with this whole COVID-19 thing. When you're looking at, and I'm going to deal with viruses specifically here, although what the main points also apply to bacteriological diseases. But when you're dealing with epidemics and pandemics, outbreak of disease, there are two factors involved. One of them is morbidity, and the other one is mortality. Morbidity is how infectious is this disease? How easy is it to catch? How easy does the disease move from one person to another? High morbidity means that it's easy to catch this disease. Mortality means how many people die from the disease. And that's pretty self-explanatory. But these two things together are Lord Bio says it's not not morbidity. That's what I've read in the several medical texts that I've read. But in any event, that's what I'm going to go with until I know better. So infectiousness, I'm going to call that morbidity, and mortality is how many people it kills. Now, something like what I think is going on in terms of what's happening in front of our eyes is really pretty simple. Think back to Ebola. I did a I did I did a segment on Ebola when the Ebola outbreak was at its peak in terms of peak hysteria, and I said that Ebola is going to be contained because Ebola's morbidity is low. Its mortality is very high. People who catch Ebola, depending on the strain, whether it's Marburg or whatever, but hemorrhagic viruses like Ebola have a very, very high mortality. In some cases, it's 80%, 90%. So people were terrified of Ebola, and rightfully so. Morbidity is how many people have the disease. Okay, fair enough. That's a good description. I hadn't quite realized the distinction. Thank you for that, Lord Bios. But in any event, I'm still going to use the word morbidity because morbidity it's not necessarily how easily the infection is spread, but how many people get it. So it's close enough to what I want. That's probably why I misunderstood the term. In any event, here's the thing. How many people can get the disease's virulence? I thought that had to do with the severity of the disease. Let me just use these terms, and I'll research them further. But the point I'm making is the same. Back in the late 2000s, we had a serious outbreak of Ebola. Ebola is a terrible infectiousness. Okay, got it. I will think about that and try and do this on the fly. So when you look at Ebola, Ebola is a deadly disease, but it's not easy to catch. In order to catch Ebola, you have to contact the blood of a person who has the disease. You have to actually touch the blood, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'd be willing to bet significantly that you not only have to touch the blood of somebody who's got Ebola, but there has to be a break in the skin because the skin is by far your best defense against all diseases. The skin is essentially invulnerable. It's fantastic. Just about every disease that humans get. In fact, the skin is essentially nearly perfect protection. The diseases that that kill us by getting past the skin. And there are two ways to get past the skin. One way is to punch a hole in the skin. So if I put a cut in my hand or I get a bullet hole in me, now there's a hole in the skin. Now all of these microbes and viruses can get inside me and they can start to get into the second line of defense, which is the immune system, but the skin does almost all of the work. Now, one of the biggest killers of people has been diseases that have been passed, that have gotten into our bodies by holes in the skin, but they're not bullet holes. The holes in the skin that have killed I don't know if billions, but certainly hundreds of millions of people have died because there were holes in the skin that allowed diseases to get inside the skin, and those holes were made by either mosquitoes or fleas. Yellow fever, malaria, those diseases are spread by mosquito bites, but again, the skin protects us against that. It's mosquito's ability to get through the skin and drink the blood of an infected person, then bite somebody else and inject the blood of the infected blood past the skin. That's how you spread malaria and yellow fever and things like that. It's a hole in the skin. Black plague, what's going on? Bubonic plague was spread by rats. Rats carried the fleas. The fleas were able to break the skin in a bite, and in the same way that the mosquitoes were, get past the defenses of the skin. So it's holes in the skin that cause us all these diseases, and the deadliest animal on the earth by far, I mean by far, is the mosquito. The mosquito has killed more humans than any other source combined, including all other diseases and all wars put together, natural disasters. I'd be willing to bet that the mosquito is greater killer of humans than any other single source combined. All right, so if you can stop getting holes in the skin, most diseases can't touch you, but others can't. And the way other diseases can get through you is not getting through the skin. There's another way to get inside the body, and that is that the body has 5 holes in it. you count the nose as one, we have 5 holes, and these holes are used for intake in most cases, and in some cases they're also used for output, but nevertheless, there are 5 holes in the human body. And if you have time to kill, you can probably figure out what they are. These are holes between the inside and the outside, and there are, and Telek says some are funner than others. He's certainly right about that. But the fact of the matter is that the human body has to somehow get food inside of it and air, oxygen inside of it, and it has to get waste outside. And so that means you have to have holes in your body. Yes, he's right. The tear ducts count too, but well, people are always making my life so damn difficult. So there are holes in your body, and some diseases are able to get into those holes. Now, those holes in the body, in terms of the throat and the nose and the other ones, are lined by mucus. The entire pathway into the body is covered with this material, this mucus that infectious agents run into and bounce off of. It's just killed. It just can't get through it. These are called mucous membranes, and your nose is one, and your mouth is one, and so are the other ones. They've got a lining of mucus that protects the pathway into the body, so that even though pathogens can get inside the actual body, they can't get through the protection on the holes in the body. So far, so good. Some viruses are able to get through these, and bacteria are able to get through these mucous membranes, so they can, in fact, defeat the lining on the holes in our bodies. And COVID-19 is one of those. Influenza, which is what COVID-19 is a virus that is able to get through the mucous membrane. And since it is able to get through the mucous membrane, it does not require a hole punched in the body by a bullet or a mosquito. Because you can defeat malaria and you can defeat yellow fever if you can kill the mosquitoes. You can't catch bubonic plague. I'm not talking about pneumonic plague. I'm talking about bubonic plague. You can't catch that if there are no rats and no fleas. Protect yourself against these things because mosquitoes and fleas are enormous compared to the size of the guys that are doing the actual hurting out there. So let's go back to Ebola and the flu, just the regular flu. Ebola has the ability, I don't know if Ebola needs a cut in the skin or not. I just don't know the answer to that. But Ebola is a virus that you have to come in contact with physically, and it's hard to catch. It's difficult to catch. Since it's difficult to catch, you can contain it. If you have a bunch of people and they're bleeding out of their eyes and they've only been sick for 2 or 3 days, you probably have the idea, don't touch that person. And so since those diseases are so fatal, they move so fast, and since you have to come into physical contact with them, you can contain a disease like that. But the flu, on the other hand, that virus is able to live inside the droplets of moisture when you sneeze. It's airborne, and it's worse than airborne. If I sneeze and I've got the flu or a cold, same kind of thing, it's a similar virus. If I sneeze and you're in vicinity, you take those droplets in. Those droplets also get through your mucous membranes, and now your viruses have gotten to me via these little microscopic water droplets. That makes it much, 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 much easier to catch the disease because I don't have to come in physical contact with that person. I only have to be in the same room with them. And furthermore, a virus like the flu can land anywhere from a sneeze, and if I touch that place where that person has sneezed, that doesn't give me the flu, but when I go and brush my nose or do this or rub my eyes, then it does, because now the virus has found its way to the mucous membranes and then it gets inside, and now I'm in trouble. So Ebola, very high mortality. I'm going to go. I understand what you said there, Lord Bios, and I'm just going to go with this now, and I just have to understand it better. So forgive me. I'm just going to call the ability to transmit the disease morbidity. Ebola, low morbidity, hard to catch, but if you do catch it, fatal in many cases. Flu, easy to catch, but virtually all cases, not so bad, not mortal. Now, what's happening is People watched Ebola outbreak 10 years ago, and they watched the effort to contain Ebola, and they were terrified about keeping Ebola contained because everybody thought, my God, if I get Ebola, I'm going to die. And if you did get Ebola, you were likely to. You were not in good shape. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing the same thing as we saw when they tried to contain Ebola. And I said you could contain Ebola because Ebola, on average, I forget what the number's called, it's something sub naught, n sub naught, something like that. There's a number for every single disease that says how many people is this disease likely to infect. In other words, if, oh, Lord Bios is a biologist, we need to talk. Actually, Lord Bios, can you contact me, please, at info@billwhittle.com and tell me your real name? I very much want to talk to you about this. I need to get these terms straightened out. I'd really appreciate it. So what people watched was an attempt to R sub naught. Now, when I did this piece on Ebola, I had a lot of people criticize me, say, no, you don't understand, Bill. You just doomed people. Ebola is going to wipe us all out. This was 7-8 years ago. And I said, I don't think so, because the number for Ebola is lower than 1. In other words, every single person who gets Ebola is likely to infect less than one person. It can still infect people, but on average it's lower, and that means that the disease will burn itself out. The flu virus can be as high as 3 or 4. That means that every person with the flu has a chance, is likely to infect 3 or 4 other people. In some cases, it's 1.5, 2. Let's say it's 3 for whatever the sake of it. So, for the sake of it, we'll say that COVID-19 has an R sub naught of 3. Everybody who gets it is likely, on average, when all the numbers are done, to infect 3 other people. You cannot contain a disease like this. It's not containable. Once it's out of either the lab or conceivably the city, it's gone. Once it's out, it's out. Especially in a case of COVID-19, where you may have the virus for 3-4 weeks and not even know it. Every single day you're going to see the number of cases increase, and here's the point I'm trying to make from a political point of view. What's happening to the world right now is people are watching health organizations try to contain a flu virus the way they tried to contain the Ebola virus. And they succeeded with Ebola, but they're not going to succeed with COVID-19. They're not. They can't. I don't see any way that it's possible. And I think most of them have already admitted that, although not publicly. And certainly its point is you should keep trying. It's obviously worth the effort. But what I think is basically happening in society right now is people are seeing that this so-called coronavirus is spreading every day. And they're connecting that they're subconsciously connecting that with the lethality of Ebola. And that's why you can have a situation where Shelley, who's our office manager, can go out to a restaurant at brunch this last Sunday and hear the people next to them, see them washing their hands and disinfecting their hands the whole time and having a serious conversation about how all of them are probably going to be dead by the end of the year. Not as a joke and not in a sarcastic way or even in a way of like defensive humor. They're convinced that everybody's going to get wiped out by this so-called coronavirus. And the reason they're doing that is because the news media and the government and everybody else is sending the signal that that's going to happen. When somebody decides to do something, I don't know if this has happened yet, but I'll use it as a great example because it's likely to happen. If the day comes, if it hasn't happened already, where the city of Boston declares that we're not going to run the Boston Marathon this year because of COVID-19, what that is telling people is that the risk of catching this thing is so great that they're canceling this event. And since they're canceling event, that must mean that if I catch this thing, I'm going to die. Because if it wasn't serious, they wouldn't. No one's going to say we're going to cancel the Boston Marathon because we have evidence that 3 of the runners in the Boston Marathon have a cold. No one's going to cancel that. So what we're doing is we're making the right effort to try and contain the disease, but the message that we're sending is that while we try to contain this thing, the reason we're trying to contain it is because it's a deadly killer. It's not. It's not a deadly killer. It's serious. It's not nothing. It's not the cold and it's not the flu. I'll get to that in a minute. But this is why people are panicking and continue to panic. They do not understand what they're dealing with here. An airborne virus like COVID-19, an influenza virus, is mutating so quickly that the immune system cannot protect against it. Let's just do a little bit of recap, shall we? And Lord Bios, I'm looking very much forward to hearing from you in person. Hopefully, we can have a phone conversation. But the guts of it is basically this: if a pathogen gets past our number one line of defense, which is the skin, if it gets past our second line of defense, which is the mucous membranes that line the holes that are already in our body, and gets into our bloodstream, then the real miracle happens. When a person dies, and it doesn't have to be a person, an animal, or whatever, when you think of the horror of a dead body, what's happening is that body begins to rot. And when you think about a dead, rotting body, what you're seeing is what would be happening to you right this second if you didn't have an immune system. The reason that a body rots and decays when a person dies is because when the person dies, the immune system shuts down. That's what those microbes that are doing to a dead body are trying to do to you all the time. But they're not succeeding because we have, as we're alive, as our biological processes continue, we have a profoundly effective and complex and magnificent defense against those microbes that are there all the time. It's not like all of a sudden microbes just appear on a dead body. They're there all the time. We're swimming in them right this second. We have our skin to protect us. We have our mucous membranes to protect us, but we have our immune system which protects us. And if we didn't have it, we would be the walking dead. These bacteria and viruses would be doing to us what they do to a dead body, but they don't do it to us because we have an immune system. So how does the immune system work? Well, it works in it has two different layers, two different approaches. One of them is when it sees something that's a pathogen, like a bacteria or a virus or something that's bad for us, once it recognizes that this thing is doing damage, it starts to attack it. And that's a battle that we win sometimes and sometimes we don't. If I cut my hand badly enough and it's septic enough, all of a sudden all of these bacteria are going to get in there, are going to start multiplying, and then it's going to be a race to see whether or not my immune system can win this fight against the infection. And the immune system's going to fight this fight in several ways. One of the first things the immune system's going to do is it's going to raise my body temperature. It's going to give me a fever because bacteria and viruses don't do as well in high temperatures. They are evolutionarily adapted to 98.6, and if you can raise the temperature of the body, that slows down and kills bacteria and viruses. Now the problem is, are you able to sustain that fever long enough before the fever kills you? It's the immune system doing the best it can. It's its best fight. Parenthetically, one of the things that makes this whole thing really clear and interesting to look at is to look at the influenza pandemic of 1919 and 1920. And here's what's interesting about that. The whole case I'm making, forgive me, Lord Bios, I'll get to this well, I'll see if I can correct it now. Ebola, high mortality, not very infectious. The flu, very infectious, not very high mortality. The flu pandemic of 1919 and 1920 was very high infectious and very high mortality. It was a form of the flu that was particularly deadly, horribly deadly. And one of the things that's so amazing and remarkable about that first pandemic flu outbreak in 1919, which killed 20 million people, maybe 40 around the world. That'd be something like 400 or 500 million people today. The reason that flu was so remarkable was it was so effective at multiplying that most of the people who died from that flu in 1919, 1920, most of them died because of their own immune system. Almost every disease that strikes mankind as an epidemic or a pandemic hits the weak and the young because they don't have as many resources to throw into the fight. Their immune system is not as developed when they're young, and it's not as robust as it is when they get old. But what was so strange about the 1919-1920 flu pandemic is that most of the people it killed were people aged 25 to 40. It hit the most people who died in that pandemic died in the peak of health. The healthier, you could make the case, this is a bit of a simplification, but you could make the case that the healthier you were, the more likely you were to die of that flu in 1920. Now, why is that? Well, as I understand it, it's because that virus multiplied so quickly that the entire body's immune system went, holy God, and went into full on overdrive and killed the people because it was working too hard. The people who had the most effective immune systems were the ones who were killed by that because the virus so triggered the immune system that people would end up dying of fever. And they'd end up dying of creating too much like inflammation or when you produce fluids. All of these things are designed to get rid of pathogens. But that virus multiplied so aggressively that the body saw it as the body just activated everything, and then most people were killed by their own immune response to the disease, died of fever, which is generated by the immune system. It's not generated by the virus. The immune system is producing the fever in order to fight the virus, and the same thing for production of mucus, inflammation, all of that stuff. So the people who were the healthiest were killed because they had the best immune system. The immune system was overactivated, and the immune system had so much work to do so fast that it ended up killing the patient. That is amazing. Almost, if you look at the mortality of that virus, you find that the older you were, the better chance you had to live because your immune system was weaker. I wouldn't go quite this far, but from the limited logic abilities I have, it seems to me paradoxically enough, that if we were to face that virus again, that flu virus, that 1919 flu virus, the best way to save people would be to give them immunosuppressants, something to knock their immune system down, because the people with the best immune systems were the ones who were being killed by it. So anyway, that was kind of a fluke. High infectiousness, high mortality, and the stronger your immune system was, the more likely you were to die. Now, the last figures I saw, which I think were from last night, I want to say, I think this is right, for COVID-19, I don't think so far, I don't think there's been a single fatality, not one, across the world of anybody under the age of 9. And if you look at and the mortality figures go way up if you are older, weaker immune system, and they go way up if you have respiratory diseases, but I forgot something critically important. So the first way the immune system works is the body is in trouble. Viruses are multiplying and all this stuff. So the body goes after them, or bacteria are multiplying. But so the defense systems go after them. And you win that fight or you don't. But if you do, and this is where the immune system is really amazing, if you do win, then the immune system has the ability to actually learn. It recognizes that these little receptor proteins in a certain form are deadly, and it recognizes them. And it says, if I ever see this construction of virus, if I ever see this protein construction again, this is bad news. And that is called immunity. And the reason that's a beautiful thing is that if I inject a single virus, speaking in the broadest possible terms, and let's say I get smallpox and I survive it. My immune system has fought a battle to the death against smallpox, and I happen to win. But the immune system remembers that battle. It remembers it. And so if I get reinfected with smallpox, the smallpox doesn't get a chance to completely overwhelm my system again before the immune system gets on the job. If I've already dealt with smallpox and survived it, then the immune system instantly recognizes it. It doesn't have to wait for it to damage the body enough to nearly kill you. It says, aha, I've seen you before. And it attacks it, and you don't get the disease in the first place because the immune system wipes it out because the immune system recognizes it. That recognition of pathogens before they do the damage is called immunity. And immunity is very simple. Immunity is the body's immune system learning that this is an enemy instead of having to discover that it's an enemy. It's told in advance. It's not waiting like saying, hey, oh, you come on into the city, and oh my God, the people that we let in 3 days ago, they're raising riot. It's like, no, you look like a Carthaginian to me, and you're not even getting into the building. It's the ability to recognize pathogens before they do their damage. That's what immunity is. Okay, so far so good. So that's why vaccines work. Vaccine is very simple. If I get a shot of smallpox, and I get full smallpox, I'm going to have smallpox and I'll either live or die. But if my immune system wins that battle, I'm immune to smallpox. But the genius of a vaccination is if somebody were to take the smallpox virus and weaken it, some cases even kill it, and still inject it into my body, my immune system is going to recognize that, and it's going to protect me in the future. So what vaccinations do is they give you an extremely weakened version of the disease in order for your immune system to recognize that this is an invader, and we need to see, every time we see this, we're going to attack it. And so a vaccine gives you a weak version of the disease. You don't have to fight for your life. And then when the real killer comes along, your immune system already recognizes it and it's able to destroy it before that virus gets a foothold. Turns out that Edward Jenner was able to figure out this idea of vaccination because he was studying smallpox, and he realized that you may have heard the expression pretty maids all in a row. Milkmaids were considered to be pretty maids not because they were inherently beautiful, but because milkmaids alone in that era in England, let's just say, milkmaids didn't get the pockmarks, the horrible pockmarks that Edward James almost appears to have. Well, his may be from acne. Stalin had to. One of the many things that smallpox does, if it doesn't kill you, is disfigure you by leaving all these little craters in your face. And the milkmaids, the pretty maids all in a row, didn't have those holes in their face like just about every other woman who stayed alive in those days. So what happened was that Jenner realized, and a bunch of other people as well, realized that there was something about cowpox. Cowpox made them break out, but it didn't make them break out in nearly the same severity. It didn't make them break out to the degree that it left permanent scars on your face, and most importantly, it didn't kill you. And what they were able to deduce was that these milkmaids had caught a disease called cowpox, which isn't fatal and doesn't disfigure you. But it turns out that the cowpox virus is very, very close to the smallpox virus. And what had happened, without anybody knowing it, there's no medicine involved here, just out of sheer mechanics of how society worked, was that if you were milking cows as a young girl and you caught cowpox, you would get sick with cowpox, but it wouldn't kill you. But because smallpox and cowpox were so similar to each other, when smallpox came, your body, which had never met smallpox before, but it had met cowpox, saw smallpox and said, hey, no sir, and killed the smallpox before it had a chance to infect you. And that's why milkmaids were immune to smallpox, because they'd already gotten cowpox, and cowpox and smallpox are very, very similar. Similar enough so that the immune system, once it recognizes cowpox, will then recognize smallpox and go and get it. Okay, that's important. And here's why it's important. Cowpox and smallpox are very similar. And so you could immunize yourself against smallpox by giving somebody cowpox. But the viruses that make up the flu family are mutating so quickly, and the same for the cold. Why don't we have a vaccination for the cold? Why don't we just go and get a cold shot? And furthermore, why don't we have a cold shot when we're an infant and be protected against the cold for the rest of our lives? Why is it that we get colds at all? It's a virus. Why don't we just go and get a cold shot when we're kids and never, ever, ever get a cold again? Why does having the cold not protect us against having the cold again? The way that chickenpox does. You get chickenpox once. If you get chickenpox, you survive it. Your body recognizes chickenpox. Let's not get into shingles and all the rest of this stuff. I'm trying to keep things simple enough to understand. Why is it that you can have a cold and not get immunity to a cold? Why? It's not that way with virtually every other disease. Once you get it, you've got the immunity. You get measles, you get immune to measles, you don't get measles again. All these childhood diseases protect us for the rest of our lives. Why do we continue to get colds? We get colds because the virus that generates a cold is changing its outside so quickly and so constantly and so effectively that if I catch a cold today, my body would actually produce immunity against that cold. But the cold that comes in even 2 weeks from now is changed so much that my body doesn't recognize it. It doesn't recognize it. So the cold is always changing. And as Astronerd points out, having the cold only immunizes you, he's got it exactly right, against that cold. It's changing so fast that the next time you get a cold, it's not the same cold. It's having very similar experience to your body because the virus is very similar, but the outside of it has changed enough so that the immune response you had to your previous cold doesn't recognize the next cold. That's why you can get colds for the rest of your life, and many people do. Now we get down to the facts here. Now we get to the facts. COVID-19 is an influenza-type virus, which means it mutates very quickly. And because it mutates very quickly, two things happen. Number one, because it behaves like a flu, it's very infectious. It's very easy to catch. You can spread it through the air, which means that you cannot contain it. Once it's out of the gate, it's out. It's not going to be contained. It can't be. I'm fairly convinced that this is the case. It's going to spread, and there's no stopping it. And so that's one thing. The second thing is we don't have time to build a vaccine against this yet because we don't know enough about it yet. And we also don't know whether COVID-19 is changing fast enough to be immune resistant. It's going to spread. That's the bad news. The good news is that this particular virus is not terribly lethal. The mortality is really quite low. And when you look at how the mortality breaks out, it turns out that just about everybody has absolutely nothing to worry about. Many, if not most of the people that have this virus or have had it, recovered from it, didn't even know they had it. The virus was so weak in so many cases, the body was able to deal with it so well, a normal healthy immune system was able to deal with it so well that it was either at the very least a mild case of flu or in many cases, if not most cases, they didn't even know they had it. Yes, the virus is in me. Yes, the virus is multiplied. Its symptoms and its attacks are not so severe. The body basically just killed it, recognized it, and killed it. Whether or not I'm immune to it in the future remains to be decided, but it wasn't that big a threat, and so we killed it. And so I didn't even know I had the damn COVID-19. So far, so good. So now I got a disease that's highly infectious and it's going to spread. The good news is it doesn't really hurt too many people, but some people it does, and some people it will kill. And that's not an insignificant number. That number is probably anywhere from 1% of the total population to 3% maybe. But when you really break it down, what you find out is that almost everybody is going to be exactly fine. I would go down tomorrow and catch this frickin' COVID-19. If I could, I'd get it tomorrow. I would get it tomorrow just to get it over with. Okay? It's not going to damage me, but there are two people in my family who really are at genuine risk here. One of them has a very severe respiratory problem, a lifelong acute respiratory problem, and the other one's my mom, who's in her late 90s. Those two people alone in my family that I'm able to look at are really at risk from COVID-19. And so what that's telling me is this, and this is the thing I really want to hear from Lord Bios. It's always great to have an expert here. Here's the way I look at things. We thought when you're dealing with Ebola, as an example, which is very lethal and you do not want to get Ebola. But because Ebola is not very infectious, you could build a wall around the cases of Ebola and contain the virus. Stay with me on this. Because Ebola is not very infectious, here's an outbreak of Ebola, quarantine that, isolate that. Here's an outbreak of Ebola, isolate that. Isolate that. And since the disease is less than one, it will eventually burn itself out. You can build a wall around the outbreaks in Ebola. I don't think you can do that with an influenza virus. You can't contain it. And what I'm saying is you can't contain it. You can't build a wall around the virus. So what does that mean? That means you have to build a wall around the people that the virus will kill. Everybody's going to get the virus. But the wall can't be about containing the virus. The wall has to be now, because you can't build a wall that big. It's out. Now what we have to do is we have to identify the people who are at risk of being killed by this and build a wall around them. We have to protect the people who are at risk because this thing is getting out, it's going to get out, and not many people are going to matter. Most people won't even know it. So you have to protect the people who are at risk. You have to build a wall of protection around the people who, if they do get it, will pay for it. And that is possible. That's what an isolation ward is for. That's what we can do. But when somebody says we're going to cancel the Boston Marathon, all they've done is scare the living daylights out of people, and it does absolutely nothing. It does nothing. It's not going to stop this. All it does is scare people. And it scares people into pulling resources out of the system that they don't need. I don't need cotton masks and I don't need antiviral medication because this COVID-19 virus has got no chance against me. I'm in extremely good health. It's not going to touch me. I'm probably not even going to know I have it. I've certainly had worse, and so on. But resources in terms of medicine, doctors, vaccines, medical gloves, all of this stuff that's actually needed. That stuff needs to be built around people like my sib and my mom and all the other millions of people out here who will die from this disease if we don't protect them from it. But we can't protect them from it by stopping the virus. The virus is out. We got to build a wall around them. We can't build a wall around the virus. And all we're doing is watching on the news every single day as people get more and more and more panicked as the wall around the virus gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And people say, my God, this thing is getting out. It is getting out. It's going to get out. And it doesn't matter if you're not one of these people, small number of people who are at risk here. So why don't we start talking about this like adults? Why don't we have an adult conversation with adult people and say, listen, this is the flu. It's a form of the flu. It's a particularly dangerous form of the flu if you are old, weak, respiratory conditions, and so on. The first guy who died in America of COVID-19 was a guy whose health was so poor he was barely alive in the first place. I mean, he was in extreme respiratory distress. And it turned out he had the virus, and it turned out that may have put him over the edge. So people hear a death in America and they, oh my God, you know. And think about the Chinese. Think about what the Chinese did. First of all, when you're talking about mortality numbers and numbers of death, the Chinese smoke like chimneys. All of them, as a culture, cigarette smoking is enormously, enormously more prevalent than it is in American culture today. And so if you've been smoking a long time, your lungs are already in trouble. They're already fighting against a problem that you've put there. They're already degraded. They've already suffered damage. They're already scar tissue, all of that stuff. So if you drop an airborne virus into a population that smokes and one that doesn't, the one that smokes is going to take a bigger hit because they're already more at risk. They've already got more damage done to the system. But a great example of what I'm trying to get clear here is that look at what China did when this virus broke out. They built a wall around Wuhan. Now forget about whether or not the wall got out. Let's just say for the sake of the argument that they put a glass dome over Wuhan and managed to contain the virus. Okay? Let's just say that. And they built this enormous resource of building this wall around Wuhan. And I don't know what the number is here either, but let's say for the sake of the argument that there's 1 million people inside that wall. So they spent this resource to build a wall around 1 million people. And of that 1 million people, 990,000 and some other hundreds of them are fine. The people who died inside that wall died whether the wall would have been there or not. Likewise, the people inside the wall would have lived whether the wall would have been there or not. Instead of trying to circle the entire city of Wuhan, what they had to do is they had to go out and find the people who were at risk and isolate those people. And they didn't. They isolated the entire city. And so the virus spread. If they had realized what this thing was, and they probably did, certainly they did before they admitted it, then instead of sealing off Wuhan, what they should have done was they should have gone through the entire city and said, anybody over the age of 60, anybody over the age of 70, especially over 80, especially over 90, especially anybody who has a history of heart failure, anybody with heart disease, anybody with respiratory problems, you people come with us. And you would have saved a lot more lives that way. But that's not what happened. And that's not what's happening here. They're scaring the living daylights out of everybody about a virus that's not going to be a fatal problem, if a problem at all, to virtually everybody in the country. And what is happening is people are falling apart and people are getting scared and people do stupid things when they get scared. And the best case scenario of a scared population is that they grab resources that are needed to protect the people who are actually at fault. If everybody who gets a cold from now on, or the flu, is convinced that they've got COVID-19, and they trot themselves down to the hospital, and demand medical care because they've got a real cold or a real flu and they're showing symptoms, then what they're doing is they're pulling limited medical resources away from the people who genuinely now need these resources in order to survive. And and this is the message that somebody has to get across to people. And I haven't seen it done yet, so I'm going to have to do it. And if I do it, I've got to get this one exactly right. I mean, I've got to get this exactly right. This isn't political opinion. This isn't what I think about things. This is life and death situation. But I think you can not only relieve people's fear, but you can also save a lot of lives if you treat them as adults. They don't have to be bacteriologists or epidemiologists or virologists. They have to be just a basic adult. What, somebody wants to see the whole shirt? Medium speed, some drag. Right? This is what somebody has to do. Somebody has to speak to the American people and the people of the world as if they were adults and say, listen, this is an influenza virus. It's going to get out. It is not containable. It's already not contained to the degree that we can contain it. We should, but this business of canceling public events is like trying to cancel a public event to prevent the spread of the common cold, and it's not going to work. It's not only not going to work, it's going to scare the daylights out of people. What we need to do is we need to say that virtually everybody with a healthy immune system and people in certain categories, we say the history of this disease so far is that you will, if you develop symptoms, will develop flu-like symptoms. Many people will not develop symptoms at all. So don't panic about the flu spreading if you're a healthy person. But if it turns out you have a history of heart disease, or you're of an advanced age, if you have an immunosuppressed disease, if you've got any kind of respiratory predisposition, if you've got any kind of internal damage to your lungs or to your heart valves, anything that having a serious flu would put you more at risk for, you need to be protected. But we're not going to protect you by trying to ban the Boston Marathon. You're going to need to come to an isolation ward in a hospital. And finally, on top of all of this prevention stuff, the one thing that nobody's talking about is it's not like we're exactly unarmed in this fight, This is not 1919. This isn't 1920. This is 2020. And if somebody who is susceptible, somebody who's in a high mortality group, comes down with COVID-19, this doesn't mean they're going to die. It may mean they're going to die if they're left out in the middle of a field someplace, but they're not here anyway. It means that even if you're a high-risk person where the disease has a high mortality rate, it means that now you can Lord Bio says severe pneumonia. That's what ends up killing patients. He's right. The people who died from the influenza pandemic, almost all of them died from pneumonia. The immune system was so busy fighting the influenza that the pneumonia got into it's a bacterial infection, and it can be, and so you die of secondary diseases. That's what AIDS does. AIDS doesn't kill you. AIDS has never killed a single person ever. The AIDS virus doesn't kill you. The AIDS virus weakens your immune system to the point where you can't defend yourself against common things that people just fight off every single day. People die of common things with AIDS because their immune system is gone. So even if you get COVID-19, and even if you have existing lung condition or heart condition or so on, you'd be in real trouble if you were untreated. But this is not the country, and really, to some large degree, not the world, where things go untreated. If you have it and you develop extreme pneumonia, we have still got some terms. We've got antivirals that will slow the spread of the virus. And we have antibiotics, and this is the final thing that has to be said. We have maybe one, I don't know, we have so overprescribed antibiotics that viruses and bacteria, because antibiotics have no effect on viruses whatsoever. But because we have made antibiotics like tetracycline so easily available, tetracycline has killed virtually all of the bacteria that causes these diseases, but the ones that were resistant to tetracycline had survived the battle with tetracycline. It's an inverse. Instead of the body fighting against the bacteria, now the bacteria is fighting against science. Those few bacteria that survived their encounter with tetracycline as an antibiotic are either immune to or resistant to tetracycline. And so all of these antibiotics that we've used and arguably overused are less effective now because these bacteria are resistant to them. Now I don't remember the name of it, but I'll get it in 8 seconds because that's the delay time on the live stream here, comment stream. But we have held in reserve one very, very powerful antibiotic, and it is not prescribed unless it is absolutely life or death, and even then under certain circumstances. Thank God we had the wisdom to do that. We had a wisdom to hold on to one antibiotic and use it so infrequently and make sure that nothing gets out of that room. Is it Cipro? That we John Pershing says it's single malt scotch for the win. So we do have antibiotics that still can come in and go after the diseases that this virus can make you weak of and weak to. So that's the situation as I see it. And then there's one final thing. Yeah, Lord Bio says antibacterial resistance is the greatest threat to humanity today. Absolutely right. We came up with this miracle weapon and we over-deployed it, and as the body becomes immune and resistant to disease, then the disease becomes immune and resistant to the medicine. But anyway, the final thing I think that we have to accept is this, and this is the thing no one's talking about because no one wants to talk about it. We do not have a right to live our lives as if nothing can ever happen to us. We don't. We don't have the right to live our life as if we have. We don't have our. We do not have a right to perfect health. All of us, all the time. We don't. It'd be nice to think that, and it's a measure of how successful science and medicine is, and people like Walter Reed and the Yellow Fever Commission, the people who gave their lives for this, and Pasteur and Jenner and Lister and all the rest of them. We have been so astonishingly successful at this that we have now reached the point where we expect that it is our right as Americans to never get a fatal disease. And infectious diseases scare us in a way that nothing else does. And I think that's so deep in us you could almost say it's genetic. People fear cancer, and rightfully so. And they fear many other things, rightfully so. But plague scares us on a level that nothing else does. And this is what people are feeling now. They're feeling deep in that root of the brain. They're feeling that this is going to cost us everything. Relative gets cancer, you feel sorry. You get cancer, you feel even sorrier. But if a relative has bubonic plague and you realize you may have it and everybody has it and your children have it and the whole world's going to end, that's the kind of fear that's starting to develop out there, and that's what we have to do something about. But one of the things we have to face is we do not have a right to live forever in perfect health. We believe we do, and we've come to believe we do because medicine and science has been so effective that it's given us the ability to live this kind of a life where we have the illusion of this as being somehow so much real that it's a right, but it's not. And the bottom line here is, what I'm really trying to say is, we won't really be able to deal with this disease, or any other disease for that matter, until we understand that, yes, an intelligent approach to it means we all have to fear less than usual. And yes, we need to understand that we need to protect the people who are at risk. And yes, we have medicines that can combat these things. And yes to all of these things. But this is a new disease and it's going to kill people. And that's all there is to it. It's all there is to it. And if you want to keep score, and sometimes I do, sometimes I keep score because score gives us perspective. If COVID-19 is a new form of virus, a new form of flu that is more deadly than regular flu, and it kills 2 or 3% of the population that is high at risk, then that's a tragedy. And I'm not demeaning it. But if you want to keep score, the addition of COVID-19 to the human race is nothing like the win that we got when we eliminated smallpox from the face of the earth, and the same for yellow fever to all intents and purposes, and the same for malaria, and the same for typhus, and the same for cholera, all of it. When you think about the string of victories that we have had against infectious diseases. We have been so spectacularly successful against these diseases that we have come to a point where we believe that we should be literally immune from everything. And that's just not true. Polio, measles, typhus, cholera. 100 years ago, if you had 10 kids, the reason you had 10 kids 100 years ago, my grandfather moved to the United States from England in 1915, and he had 9 children, and all of his ancestors had 8, 9, or 10 children. The reason you had 10 children was not just because there was no form of convenient birth control. The reason you'd have 10 children was because 4 of them wouldn't make it to 16. That was just life, and you accepted it. And if you think those people didn't care, if you think that you were sitting there in 1880 and you had a 2-year-old daughter die of yellow fever or scarlet fever or whooping cough or measles, tuberculosis, name it. If you think that that parent losing that 2-year-old daughter hurt less to them than it would to you, you got another thing coming. It's not how it works. It's just ongoing, rampant, perpetual grief. And we have been given a world free of that through enormous efforts of adults who have been able to face these things, and the bravery of men like Walter Reed that go into areas infected with yellow fever in order to figure out why yellow fever kills people, and then to eventually find out why and cure yellow fever. We just need to grow up and face the fact that we're going to take some hits from this disease, and we're going to do our best to fight it, and we're going to do amazing things to fight it, but we're going to take some hits, and that's unavoidable. And to demand otherwise is not only unrealistic and destructive, it's actually immoral. It's an insult to what life really is. It's an insult to how far we've come, and it's an insult to the entire idea that these things can be fought. That's not to say that you can't grieve somebody. Somebody dies from a disease, doesn't matter what the disease is, it hurts just the same. But to become hysterical over this is not only not going to do us any good, it's immoral, and it's beneath us as a species. Yeah, it's beneath us. We need to understand how far we've come, and we need to keep going, and we need to correct our mistakes, and we need to continue to improve. And it can improve, and it will improve. There has not been, as I record this on March 5th, 2020, there has not been a single fatality from a crash of a major airline carrier in the United States in 20 years, 40, 50,000 flights a day. 20 years have passed. Almost. 2001 was the last one, in just after 9/11 attacks, have passed since that happened. Since the last time there was a big plane crash where people died, 20 years have passed. You know why? You know why that's happened? It's not luck, and it's nothing random about it. The reason we haven't had a major commercial jetliner crash in 20 years. Hi, we're good. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye. The reason we haven't had a commercial jetliner crash in 20 years was because we had a lot of them crash before 20 years. And we learned things from them. We didn't just go out and make the same mistakes again. We had the courage and the wisdom and the discipline to find out what was causing these airlines crashes, and one by one, we just eliminated them. We just did. And it's essentially what we've done with disease too. We've just one by one figured them out and put a stop to them through discipline and reason and logic and courage. And nobody gets on a plane today that I'm aware of, except for me and maybe a handful of other people in the entire world. Nobody gets on a plane today and says, it's amazing that this plane is not going to crash today. Because it's not. and you have to remember that the reason I can get on that aircraft with 100% confidence is because of all of the people who got on an airplane with 50% confidence, and then 60% confidence, and then 80% confidence, then 90% confidence. The courage of those people to continue flying, and the accidents that resulted were the lessons that we learned as a society. In a weird sort of way, that's how we immunized ourselves against aircraft accidents. We had enough of them to recognize them, and 20 years of 40, 50,000 flights a day is not coincidence. It's not. It'll never be perfect. There are going to be crashes of commercial jets in this country in the future, but they're not going to be anything like what happened in the past. And whatever happens next will mean that won't happen again. And that's kind of the way I look at COVID-19. It's like it's a blip after an incredible victory. Oh, here's something new we didn't know. Okay, well, we're going to pay for this lesson. But so much of the work has been done in air safety and in public health. So much of it has been done that it's shameful for us to make such a hysterical reaction when you consider the amount of ground that we've covered and how much ground we've already gained, and what people prior to us had to endure. That's it, you know. Yeah, I'd love to be I think the whole argument that I just made about this virus is nothing but good news for people who are used to thinking that they're all going to die. But there's never perfect good news. There's never a zero chance that the plane you're going to get in is going to crash. But if you get on a plane tomorrow, the chance that your plane is going to crash is so close to zero, it might as well be. And when you think about the number of people that have died from these horrible diseases since there have been, not since there have been people, since there's been life on Earth, it's a bit shameful to be invoking the kind of rage and fear that we invoke. And that is a product of our own success. And if we're gonna have the hysteria, okay, but can we at least have the recognition of why we're hysterical about it? If we're gonna get hysterical and cancel things like public events that won't have any impact on this at all, because we're so terrified of something so relatively impotent. If we're going to do that, can we not at least recognize that this hysteria is due to the success that we've had, the staggering success that we've had, and the realization too that as we understand, we fought this battle for centuries to understand how these life forms like bacteria and these half-life forms like viruses work. And everything we've done so far has been to prevent them from damaging us. And one of the ways we prevented them from damaging us in the case of smallpox is we've simply eradicated it. It has run out of food and died. It exists in a few small test tubes around the world, but it's gone. It's dead. We killed it. Smallpox, that particular virus, is gone. And we did that by depriving it of its fuel. But now, for the first time in human history, we are understanding things on a level where we may now be able to simply say, we're not going to wait for smallpox. We know what smallpox's RNA sequence or COVID's RNA sequence looks like, and we're going to go out and get it. We're not going to wait for it to come here. We're now at the point where we are beginning to understand genetic engineering to the degree where we will be able to say to the cold virus, we're not going to take this shit anymore, cold virus. We know how you work. We know how you change, and we know that your ability to change is faster than our immune system, but it's not faster than our intellect. And and very soon, we're going to start constructing uh, protein-sized devices that are just going to seek you out and destroy you, and that'll be the end of you. And it's not going to be the end of us. So there. I just love being a human being. I swear to God, I do. I am immeasurably proud of this species. Always have been. I never understood this human hate. I never have. Never, ever understood it. Maybe next time we'll have a long conversation about why we may be the only intelligent life in the universe. I think there's a strong case that we are now, and I think it's stronger every day the more I think about it. Excuse me. No, let me rephrase that. That I think we may be the only, well, given the size of the universe and the number of chances, but I think intelligence in technology is so much rarer than we think. I think the galaxy is essentially completely empty of vehicles, but filled with life. But in any event, uh, we've done pretty well for ourselves, and we ain't done yet. And parenthetically, it looks like we may not have to go through another dark ages before we make another big step. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. I know I see a lot of things go by in the comment section, so let me just replay two things. And one of them is this. Julius, I don't have your email address. If you can send it to info@billwhittle.com. I can correspond with you, but we will be there. Natasha and I are both looking forward to it very much. And the second thing is Lord Bios, also info@billwhittle.com. If you could just mention this conversation. I've been waiting to talk to somebody like you. I've put out some emails trying to find somebody who really understood what was going on. And I need to be right about this. And he just said, remember, don't panic. And this is the last thing that's really important. In 1920, they found out after it was over that one of the reasons that people got so scared was because all the government did was say, don't panic. This is a profound, and this is part of my wheelhouse, not the biology by any means or the medicine, but this is something I understand. Most of the fear that was generated in 1920 was generated by the government saying there's nothing to worry about and that it's under control. And this is something I have some expertise in. The pandemic, influenza pandemic at 1919, 1920 came in 3 waves. The first wave in the spring was pretty mild, and if you got it in the spring, you were actually pretty lucky, because when it came back in the fall, that was when the real deadly one came. And then there was kind of like an echo of it, a third wave that came. But in the serious one, and the one in the fall, October of 1919, there was one city in America that had significantly lower mortality than virtually every other city. And remember, this isn't driven by mosquitoes or anything. This is a very highly contagious disease. And that city, of all places, was San Francisco. And one of the reasons that San Francisco did much better than other cities was because San Francisco is one of the few places in the country that told the people the truth in the newspapers. Didn't lie to them, told them everything that they knew, told them what they knew about prevention, told them what they could do, and didn't just continue to say, don't panic, it's under control, as more and more people died. This, to me, is the big lesson of that, and what we're seeing now, and what I'd like to do my little part to try and prevent. When you say don't panic, that's exactly the message you need to send, but you can't just say don't panic. What you need to say is, here's why you don't need to panic. Because if you just say don't panic, people panic. Anyway, I'll do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge, made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, who continue to keep these lights on here, and for whom we are eternally grateful. Let me just take a quickie look at my calendar here. I don't think I'm out of town next week. I know I will be out of town 2 weeks after that, because I'm going to Georgia to watch somebody get married. Looks like we're here next weekend, next Thursday. So I expect to see you then. Thank you for all the kind comments and all the kind remarks. It was just one of those. Best way I can describe what happened to me last week was by my favorite quote from Abraham Lincoln, who, as you probably know, was a woodcutter, and for many years of his life he made a living with his axe. And Lincoln once said, he said, if I had 6 hours to chop down trees, I'd spend 4 hours sharpening my axe. That's a man who knows his job. Number one, the best way to keep chopping down the most trees possible is to keep sharpening the axe. And looking back on it, I realized I was just hacking harder and harder and harder with a particularly duller and duller blade. And finally, I just said, I can't do this anymore. I just kind of said, I'm out of energy. I'm exhausted. I went home and slept for a week, and I feel much better now. Because even sometimes like a vacation, even a great vacation to Mexico or something, is still, there's a kind of it's not relaxation in the same way as like, I'm not going to take a shower for a week. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to sit in bed. I'm going to sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep. And when I feel like getting up, I'll get up. And that's genuine. That's bed rest is what that is. And that's what I needed. Anyway, that'll do it. So thanks to everybody for watching. As always, it's a good time to be alive. And it's getting better by the day. So that'll do it for the Stratosphere Lounge. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.